I think I preached this thought one time before, but there's a need to do it again, I think. How does it feel to be God? First question that comes to my mind is, how am I supposed to know? I don't claim that. Never have. Hope I haven't, anyway. How would we know how it feels to be God? You know, God teaches us with the same emotions that He has. He teaches us how He feels by telling us about things that happen to us. Like what it is like to be a father. When Grayson told us about his brother, he had a hard time not crying, and so did I. The next generation is so important. The whole world depends on the next generation. So it's extremely important not only that we have births, and that's why I really wanted to talk about this sin of abortion. Life is so valuable. No color life, just life is valuable. It's important. Because the world will come to an end without the next generation. Now that applies to spiritually as well, because unless we have spiritual rebirths, and we go through that process of the birthing, the church dies in places. What is it like to be a father? Our Heavenly Father gives us examples of things like that so that we can understand. He gave us fatherhood, and He gave us children, and He gave us obedient children, and He gave us the other side. I've been both. I understand what it is to be both. If we take David as an example, David had a lot of children, had a lot of wives. He had a lot of children, though. He had some that were great. Solomon was such a good king when he first was given the crown. His only request of God was to give me wisdom to lead this great people. What a kid. On the other hand, there was Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son. He wasn't anywhere near as good. And David had the opposite. He had Absalom, who was such an ornery kid that he was trying to kill his father to take the throne. I mean, that should tell us something about how God feels when we rebel against our Maker. We rebel against our Father, our Heavenly Father. How does God feel? Well, think about how David had to have felt. Think about how you feel when your children rebel against you. And I'm sure that some of you, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's had your children rebel against you. It hurts. It hurts to the bone. We can feel how God feels about things. We can know what it feels like to be God if we pay attention to the lessons that He gives us. What did He feel like? We're going to look at some examples in different things of how God felt about things. He shows us these things not only with our children, but He shows us things about relationships in life. I want us to look at Luke chapter 9 because here's a story that we talked about in Bible class on Wednesday night. You know the relationship that the Jews had with the Samaritans. It was really rough. I mean, there was animosity on both sides. There was prejudice on both sides. There was such bias on both sides. Ever since the days of Jeroboam, when Jeroboam took the priesthood away from the real priests and sold it to the highest bidder, and then moved the worship to different places in Israel, finally wound up in Samaria, the city of Samaria. That's where the Samaritans came from. It's one of the reasons that the Jews despised them so much. The other reason was because they were only part Jewish, they were part Jew and part everything else. They were the original Heinz 57 variety of person. They were mixed with everybody, and the Jews just despised that. They let it be known. So the Samaritans didn't generally like them either. That's why the story of the Great Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, was such a good story, because it was somebody that was hated by somebody and took care of them anyway. This is love your enemies in action. Well, the Lord's going through Samaria on his way to Jerusalem. He sends the disciples ahead to find a place. Go find us a motel. So they go into the city and they tell the Lord's coming through. He's on his way to Jerusalem. We need a place to stay. You can't stay here, you Jew. You're on your way to Jerusalem. I'm not sure about the words that they said, but they wouldn't let them stay. So here's what happened. When his disciples, James and John, saw this, when they heard that, you said, what? You Samaritans said that about my Lord? I'm ad-libbing a little bit here. They had just been insulted. The Lord had been insulted. They had just slapped Jesus in the face, metaphorically. They said, Lord, you want us to command that fire come down from heaven and consume them? Now, understand, they didn't have that power yet. I mean, they had been given power to go do a lot of things. But they had seen, that the Lord could command the waves, stop, and everything just calms down. They had seen the Lord take water and turn it into wine. They had seen miracles that just astound you. They knew that he had that kind of power. They knew that that power was at their fingertips if the Lord gave it to them. So what was their reaction? We'll show them. Bring fire down out of heaven. Just scorch them. Crispy critters. We're going to get back at you. That's the way they felt. So how did the Lord respond to that? It says he turned, in verse 55 of Luke 9, it says he turned and he rebuked them and he said, you don't know what kind of spirit you are of. Now, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether he was talking about you don't know that you're God's, or you don't know that actually right now you're of something else. But Paul talked about that in another place. Here's the thing. And this is kind of fun to do here. They were thinking like the Lord was thinking. That's what they were thinking. But here's the reality of their thinking. Ephesians chapter 2. Paul deals with this, and he tries to help us to understand there's more than one spirit working out there trying to get our attention. He says, and he's writing to Christians now. Understand this. He's writing to people who have already become part of the body of Christ. These people know some things. He says, you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you formerly walked, not anymore, but you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince, there's a word for you, of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. There's two kinds of spirit. There's only one spirit. This this sounds like a oxymoron or something like that, but there's one Spirit, but there's two ways that Spirit goes. We're all products of the same. There's only one Father of spirits. Hebrews tells us. Only one Father of spirits. So we all come from the same place. But there is a rebellion in that spirit world. And there is someone who is trying to lead us away. And when the Lord heard them say, "Can we call fire down from heaven and burn them up?" It was exactly opposite of the reason that Jesus came in the first place. So what is it that was happening right there? There was someone trying to get their attitude switched and do something absolutely opposed to what Jesus came and was dying for. He says, "In which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience." Here's what they were thinking. They were thinking like this spirit was thinking. This is the rebellious. Now think about this for a minute. Some of the best people, some of the most useful tools that the Lord has ever had this spirit that had to be removed from them. This is the rebellious Saul of Tarsus kind of thinking right here. Remember Saul, he said, when he was talking to King Agrippa, he says, "I have lived my life with a perfectly good conscience to this day." Even when Saul was killing Christians, he had a clear conscience because he was thinking that he was thinking like the Lord was thinking, but he wasn't. Let's go back to Luke 9. Here's why Jesus came into the world. He said, "For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." So they just went on to another village. Didn't call fire down out of heaven. Didn't call fire down out of heaven because some of those people that rejected him right then would later on, with more evidence, with more experience, turn to the Lord. Great patience on the side of the Lord. That's a father with his children right there. That's a good father with his children right there. We have such a problem in this nation with children not having parents. Even when children have parents sometimes, they don't have good parents. Here's what I've tried to help people understand from the time that you start thinking about having children. From the time that thought even crosses your mind, before you ever start dating, before you ever get married, before you ever have the opportunity, legitimate opportunity to bring children into the world. Think about this. That until that child that you bring into the world grows to a certain age, a certain ability, you are the supreme being. You are God to that child. You are the supplier of every need. You are the answer to every question. You are the example that they are looking at until they grow to know the difference. So understand the responsibility that comes with being a parent, and also understand that you can know how God feels by seeing how He looks at you and me as His children. what Jesus was doing right here? When he was walking and talking with his disciples, and when he gave them the opportunity to say, bring fire down out of heaven, and then he corrected them, not only was he being a good father to them spiritually, but he was explaining the mind and the feelings of the Almighty. This is Word living up to the title that he was given in the very beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. That means that he not only created us all, this very same person that took the form of a baby and grew up in a carpenter's home, he is the one who is now explaining how God feels about everything. He's expressing the mind of God. He's expressing or explaining how God feels about everything. He's expressing how God felt about the disrespect that we read about in Isaiah chapter 1. I want to go back to that now, and I want to read a few of those things, and I want to talk about them a little bit. In Isaiah chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. It says, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. There are three prophets that we need to understand about this particular time. They all tell us that they're at the same time with the same kings. One was Isaiah, one was Hosea, and another was Amos. I want to talk about those three because all three of them had a different mission. All three of them were dealing with the same kind of problem, but they came from different backgrounds and were talking to different groups of people. Isaiah. It's interesting that Isaiah mentions here the kings that were during his ministry. Uzziah and Jotham and Ahaz and Hezekiah. There's an up and down here with good and evil between these kings. Finally winding up with the best of them all at that particular time, which was Hezekiah. The last king that it mentions during Isaiah's prophesying. One thing it doesn't mention is that the son of Hezekiah, one of the very best kings, was Manasseh, the very worst king, until he wasn't. But he's the one that evidently took Isaiah and stretched him out between horses and sawed him in two. Because he didn't like what he had to say. Here's what he had to say that he didn't like. Sons I have reared and brought up. Here's how God feels about kids. We're his children. We are, I am so impressed with the prayer that Jesus prayed in the garden. Abba, Father. Two different terms. Two different terms for dad. One of them is the authoritative, Father. The other's Abba, which is more like daddy. One is the tender. The other's the authority. The very person that said that is the one this is talking about right here. Sons I have reared and brought up, but they have revolted against me. Then he says something so simple. An ox knows its master. And a donkey will come back to the manger of the owner. It happens every time. They have enough sense to do that. But Israel? You know why I put that in bold print there? Israel. You know where they got that name? That name was given to Jacob when Jacob wrestled with the angel. Hosea chapter 12 verse 4 or Genesis chapter 32, depending on which one you want to go to. Israel. His name was changed from Jacob, which meant heel grabber. He was kind of a deceitful guy at one point. Took his brother's birthright, but only because his brother was willing to give it up. I mean, it wasn't anything he stole from him. He sold it, he bought it, but it was kind of deceitful. But the name Israel was given to Jacob at that time, and it had nothing to do, in my estimation, had nothing to do with Jacob. It had to do with the attitude and the disposition of these children from that day forward until the Christ was to come. They struggled and they bowed their neck and they did everything but follow the Lord. Isaiah is written at a time, not too many years before the northern kingdom of Israel is going to be destroyed. In 732, the Assyrians came and they sacked it, took a bunch of people away. In 721, they came and they absolutely destroyed Samaria. And then is when they populated that land with everybody else that they brought in, and they were mixed with the Jews that were left, the Israelites that were left, that had no value to be taken anywhere else. Thus they became the half-breeds that the Jews didn't care for at all. That's what was about to happen. That's what was going on because of their obstinance, because they were called Israel, you wrestlers with God. He said, Israel does not know. They don't understand. Sinful nation weighed down with iniquity, offspring of evildoers. You know, when you have a generation that's bad, something's going to happen with the next generation. They're going to either revolt and turn back, and we've seen that a lot in our nation. That when things get bad, the righteous step up and it comes back again. There's going to come a time, though, when the momentum is going to take it and it's going to be gone. Offspring of evildoers. They didn't correct their parents. They didn't recognize the evil in their parents. They went and they made it even worse. Sons who act corruptly. They have abandoned the Lord. Here's the thing about this. They never did completely do away with Jehovah. Never did. They always had that as their, I don't want to say major God, but kind of that idea. But they always had these other backups, a back door to turn to, a way to circumvent the laws they didn't want to follow that the Lord was giving them. They have turned away from Him. He teaches us. Now, I don't want to get into that yet. This idea of abandoning the Lord is one that we need to talk about at another time, and we will. I want to talk about, I kind of stuck with this now. That's the danger in me doing this. I'm stuck. I was talking to someone very recently about what it means to love somebody. How do you demonstrate your love for someone? And I'm talking about husband-wife love. I'm talking about father-child love. I'm talking about every kind of love that we experience in this world. How do you know when somebody loves you or not? How does God feel? You know, it's kind of hard for us to understand a relationship that we've never experienced. So the Lord uses a lot of different methods to teach us how He feels about different things. Even this unrequited love, and that means a love that's not returned. It's a love you shower, but they don't give back. And I'll tell you, when man was made in the very beginning, I'm positive with this one thing. I'm positive that God did not make us so that He could shower us with love and we could do whatever we want. Because the first law that He gave them at Mount Sinai was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And then He added a second one, to love your neighbor as yourself. Every law in this book that we call the Bible is designed to teach us how to do two things. One thing actually, but in two different directions. How to love God and how to love each other. Did you notice in that reading that we had in Isaiah how many times it talked about the orphans and the widows and justice and fairness and equity and all these kind of things that should come naturally if we're treating people the way we want to be treated? And that's what He called iniquity. That actually, it was the sin that Ezekiel says was the cause of the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah. It wasn't the sexual stuff. At least that's not what Ezekiel says. Ezekiel says, because you lived in ease, you didn't care about anybody. So, how do we know how God feels about this unrequited love? How's a human supposed to know how God feels? Well, I'll tell you what. There have been a lot of different prophets that have gone through a lot of different things. And I think Hosea may be the most admirable and the most pitiful. Because here's what Hosea was asked to do. No, let me rephrase that. Here's what Hosea was told to do. Hosea chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. The word of the Lord which came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the days of Uzziah. Same time. But Hosea is going to be preaching primarily to Israel because they're the worst. They're the ones that are going to go into captivity first. During the days, and it's during the same days. And he says, during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, that's the king of Israel at this time. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, now here's the lesson. Here's how he's going to know how God feels so that he can tell us. Think about this, folks. We were talking about arranged marriages this morning. This one, whew, I don't want this one. I don't want to. I would like to know anybody who would like to have this relationship right here. Go take yourself a wife of harlotry. I want you to go marry a prostitute. What dad has ever said that to his kid? Man, I can't even imagine. There are some things that God asks of prophets because they're in that position. You want the job? Careful what you ask for. Because here's something that I don't think anybody really wants to go through. And have children of harlotry. For the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord. You can't know how I feel, Hosea, unless you have experienced what I feel. My people who should be my bride, this is how they behave. I won't read the whole of Hosea, but I'll tell you about it. Every child that Gomer, that's not, every time I think of Gomer as his wife, I think of Gomer Pyle. That doesn't fit, but anyway, Gomer, that's quite a name right there. He married Gomer and started having children. And every child that was born to them had a name that represented something that was between them and God. Some sin, some feeling that God had about being cheated on by His people. Do you remember in Isaiah chapter 1 where it said that something about being ashamed of their love of every green tree of oaks? They were so sinful in their idolatry that every hill that had an oak tree on it, they would carve into the side of that oak tree an image of a many-breasted deity, a female deity. Well, many breasts, that kind of comes with the territory, I guess. But when that was their symbol, their image of fertility, it was worshiping the creation rather than the Creator. Now, they didn't throw God completely away, but here's where they would have this place and they'd stop and they'd have a picnic under this tree and they would offer things to this goddess of fertility just so that they'd get good crops, so that the rain would be there, so that all of these things, they were hedging their bets is what they were doing. Amos told you there were 3 prophets. We read from Isaiah. We read from Hosea. Here's what Amos says toward the end of the book of Amos. For behold, He who forms mountains and creates the wind and declares to man what are his thoughts and his feelings. He who makes the dawn into darkness and treads on the high places of the earth. The Lord, God of hosts is His name. I want to break that down a little bit right there. The Lord, that's Jehovah. That right there is Word. That's the I am. That's actually, I think it's a description rather than a name, because it means to be. It's a word that has to do with existence. No matter when you are, no matter where, no matter what, I am. That's quite a statement. That's who this is. The next word is Elohim. That's a word that does not necessarily mean God, but God is the mightiest of the mighty ones. So God is the head Elohim. It says, Jehovah, I am the mighty one of hosts, the ruler of all of the multitudes. That's what this says right here. That's the name that we know our God by. The name that should give us this awe, this respect, this love for our Father, this determination to be like Dad, to recognize the greatness of the one who created us, the greatness of the one who can cause the darkness to turn to daylight and the daylight to turn into darkness. the one who controls all of those mechanisms that create that for us. He has the same feelings that we have. We can tap into our feelings to understand how God feels about everything that happens, every relationship that we have with Him. It's not that difficult. We just have to read, and we have to put ourselves in His shoes. kind of a funny thought, huh? What size shoe is that? Those are some big shoes to fill. But that's the point. Those are big shoes. And it should be a wonderful relationship between that Creator and His children. It should be a love story where we love Him beyond belief, where nothing comes between us and our God. Every husband and wife relationship, every father and child, mother and child, parent-child relationship should be based on our understanding of how we love our God. The lesson is yours, folks. I hope that we can understand that God has the same feelings that we have. Understand how to regulate our attitudes toward Him so as to not hurt Him the way we have hurt Him in the past. If you're subject to the gospel call this morning in any way, please make your relationship with this great God right today. Won't you come?